Some people demand respect, others earn it, but the rarest ones, they remind the world who truly deserves it. Samantha adjusted her apron, balancing a tray of drinks as she weaved through the crowded diner. Another long shift, another exhausting day of fake smiles and impatient customers. But she wasn't the type to complain. A job was a job. Then, the bell above the door jingled. An older man walked in, gray hair peeking from under a worn baseball cap, his jacket a little too big on his thin frame. But it wasn't just any jacket. It was a military one. Samantha noticed immediately. The man moved slowly, his limp noticeable as he made his way to an empty booth in the back. He sat with a sigh, his hands rough and calloused from years of hard work. She grabbed a menu and walked over with a smile. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you something to drink?" The man looked up, offering a small, tired smile. "Just coffee, please." Samantha nodded, pouring a fresh cup. But as she set it down, laughter rang out from across the room. Her stomach twisted. A group of young, well-dressed businessmen sat at a nearby table, smirking as they eyed the veteran. One of them whispered something and the others snickered. Then, one of them, the loudest one, spoke, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess they'll let anyone in here these days." The others chuckled. Samantha froze. She saw the veteran's shoulders tense, his hand gripping the coffee cup a little tighter. He heard them. And so did she. The businessman leaned back, smirking. "Didn't realize this place served charity cases." That was it. Samantha slammed her notepad onto their table. The sound made the whole diner go silent. All eyes turned to her. She wasn't smiling anymore. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice sharp. The businessman raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Something wrong, sweetheart?" Samantha's jaw tightened. "Yeah, something's very wrong." She gestured toward the veteran. "That man over there? He fought for this country, and you think you're better than him because you have a suit and a fancy watch?" The businessman smirked. "Relax, honey. It was just a joke." Samantha stepped closer. "You think disrespecting a veteran is funny?" she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You sit there drinking your overpriced whiskey, acting like you own the world, while men like him sacrificed everything to protect it." The entire restaurant was dead silent. The businessman's smirk faltered. Samantha didn't let him finish. She grabbed his bill from the table, ripped it in half, and glared at him. "Get out." The businessman's face turned red. "Are you serious?" She crossed her arms. "Dead serious." The man huffed, throwing cash on the table before storming out with his friends. The second the door slammed shut, the entire diner burst into applause. Customers cheered, some whistled, a few stood up. Samantha, still fuming, turned back to the veteran. His eyes were wet. He cleared his throat, offering her a shaky smile. "Miss, you didn't have to do that." She smiled softly. "Yes, sir, I did." Then she pulled out her own notepad and scribbled something. When she handed him the paper, he blinked. It was his bill, and across it in bold letters were 2 words. "Paid in full." Tears slipped down his face. I don't know what to say." Samantha patted his shoulder. "Just enjoy your coffee, sir." And as she walked away, the whole diner watched her in silent admiration. Because that night, respect wasn't just demanded. It was given. Real heroes don't wear suits. They wear scars. The real question is, do you recognize them when they walk among you? The veteran sat frozen, staring at the words "paid in full" on the receipt, his fingers trembling. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the emotion from his eyes, but it was no use. Across the diner, people were still whispering, but this time, not about him. They were talking about the young waitress who had just done something most wouldn't dare to. A few customers stood up and walked over. An older man in a trucker hat placed a $50 bill on the veteran's table. "Your next meal's on me, sir. Thank you for your service." A woman followed, placing another $20. "For dessert if you want it." Then, one by one, people began quietly paying for his future meals. By the time Samantha returned to check on him, the pile of cash in front of him was staggering. The veteran looked up, eyes glassy. I don't understand." Samantha smiled. "That's just the world paying you back, sir." He swallowed hard, shaking his head. "I don't deserve all this." She crouched down beside him. "With all due respect, sir, yes, you do." Silence hung in the air for a moment. Then he laughed softly, wiping his eyes. "You remind me of my granddaughter," he admitted. "She always stood up for what was right, just like you." Samantha's chest tightened. "She sounds like an amazing person." "She was," he said, voice heavy with meaning. Samantha squeezed his hand. "Well, wherever she is, I think she'd be really proud of you." The veteran smiled, his wrinkles deepening. "And I think she'd be proud of you too." The bell above the diner door jingled again. But this time, when people turned to look, it wasn't to see someone leaving in shame. It was to see a hero sitting in the booth, finally getting the respect he had always deserved. And at the center of it all was Samantha, the waitress who didn't just serve food. She served justice. The loudest voices aren't always the most powerful. Sometimes real strength comes from the quiet moments, where kindness drowns out the noise. The night finally slowed, but the energy in the diner remained different. Something had shifted. People who had once been glued to their phones were now engaged in quiet conversations, sharing stories about the veterans and their families. A couple near the window talked about a grandfather who had stormed the beaches of Normandy. A younger man at the counter spoke about his sister who had just returned from deployment. The veteran sat in his booth, still overwhelmed by the outpouring of kindness. He wasn't just another customer anymore. He was seen. Samantha walked over, refilling his coffee. He smiled up at her. "I never caught your name." She wiped her hands on her apron and grinned. "Samantha." He nodded. "You can call me Frank." "All right, Frank," she said, leaning on the table. "Tell me, what's your story?" Frank hesitated. Most people never asked. Most never cared. But tonight was different. And so, with a deep breath, he began to talk. About the friends he had lost, about the moments that haunted him, about the country he had risked everything for, and the quiet struggles of coming home to a world that had moved on without him. Samantha listened intently, never rushing him, never looking away. And as he spoke, something incredible happened. The whole diner listened too. By the time Frank finished, the entire room sat in respectful silence. Samantha squeezed his shoulder. "Thank you for your service, Frank." The room echoed with quiet thank yous. Frank smiled, but this time it reached his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he thought he had lost. Honor, belonging. And all because one waitress refused to stay silent. As Samantha clocked out that night, she passed Frank's table one last time. He was still there, sipping his coffee, his heart a little fuller than before. And she didn't say anything. She just gave him a nod. And with the slightest smile, he nodded back. Because some actions don't need words. Some actions speak for themselves. Respect isn't given because of money or status. It's given because of sacrifice. The real question is, will you recognize those who deserve it before it's too late? The next morning, Samantha didn't expect anything unusual when she walked into work. But the moment she stepped through the door, the entire diner went silent. Her manager, a middle-aged woman who rarely cracked a smile, stood near the counter, arms crossed, watching her. Customers whispered, some smiling, some wide-eyed. Samantha frowned. Did I do something?" Then the bell jingled. She turned just as Frank walked in. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two uniformed officers and a man in a formal military suit. The diner held its breath as the man stepped forward. "Samantha?" he asked, his voice steady but warm. She nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir?" The man smiled. "I'm Colonel Richard Lawson, head of the local Veterans Affairs Office." He motioned to Frank. "This fine gentleman told me about what you did for him last night." Samantha glanced at Frank, who smirked. "Figured it was time someone recognized you for a change." Before she could respond, Colonel Lawson pulled something from his pocket, a neatly folded American flag. Samantha's breath caught. "For your respect, your kindness, and your unwavering courage in standing up for those who served," the colonel said. "We'd like to present you with this flag as a token of gratitude." Tears burned in Samantha's eyes as she took the flag with shaking hands. The entire diner erupted into applause. She swallowed hard, looking at Frank. "You didn't have to do this." Frank grinned. "Neither did you, but you did it anyway." A lump formed in her throat. "I just did what was right." Colonel Lawson nodded. "And that, Miss Samantha, is exactly why we're here today." A camera flashed. Someone had captured the moment. A moment that, unknown to Samantha, would soon go viral. By the end of the day, the world would know about the waitress who stood up for a veteran. But for Samantha, the only thing that mattered was the look in Frank's eyes. Because for the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. And that was worth more than any award. True respect isn't about medals or ceremonies. It's about the moments when someone chooses to stand, when no one else will.